Hello everybody and welcome to Dead by Daylight Chapter 10, Darkness Among Us lore reading. In this chapter we'll cover the lore for Jeff Johansson and the Legion. If you haven't caught yourself up on the prior lore to Dead by Daylight, follow a link in the description down below for the entire playlist covering all chapters and bios. Survivor name, Jeffrey Johansson. Occupation, artist. Jeff Johansson was born and raised in Ormond, Alberta. He grew up as a quiet only child with an aversion for large crowds. During high school, his anxious nature was mislabeled as shyness, which he covered up with a tough, stoic persona that intimidated bullies and teachers alike. At home, he discovered an interest for heavy metal and started a vinyl collection. The evocation symbolism on the covers inspired him to make some art of his own, which helped him cope with his parents' constant fighting. To escape his parents' increasingly recurrent blow-ups, Jeff started working at a video store. Few customers passed by, so he had a lot of free time to draw. A late-night regular noticed his sketches and asked him to do some artwork for his gang at the abandoned lodge up Mount Ormand. Jeff accepted the challenge and painted a large mural depicting the Legion in runny, bloody letters. He was given a $50 bill and a 12-pack for his hard work. It was his first paid commission, a milestone to be proud of. After his parents' divorce, Jeff was forced to move with his mother to Winkler, Manitoba, which was miles away from his hometown and his dad. In Winkler, Jeff was more isolated than ever, except for art and music. His solace came shortly after graduating high school when he started working at a local bar with live music performances. He found a roadie gig shortly after, leaving Winkler behind. He took up a desk job and found his calling in designing labels for microbreweries. He led a quiet and simple life. He brewed beer, took in a rescue dog, designed tattoos, and freelanced album covers for bands he liked. All until one morning, when he got a phone call from Ormond saying that his father had passed, leaving a few things to sort out. Jeff drove all the way back to Ormond. He felt a pang of nostalgia when he reached his late father's house. Inside there was an old guitar case sitting against the wall. It held a black vintage model with a sticky note that said, "For my boy." He stayed in town longer than he planned to, reminiscing about his childhood. Driving by his former high school, he remembered the mural he painted up at Mount Ormand. He bought a 12-pack and headed to the lodge. After weeks of not hearing back from Jeff, his colleagues assumed that grief had gotten the better of him. His neighbor got tired of sitting his dog, which became more and more agitated as days went by. The dog became a stray again, erring while seeking the familiar trail of Jeff's malty scent. Names: Frank, Julie, Susie, and Joey. Code name: the Legion. Frank Morrison was 19 and had little to show for it. He'd stop attending school after being kicked out of the basketball team for shoving a referee into the stands. Yet, Frank was a man of potential who could light up a room despite his bleak childhood. At 6 years old, he'd been taken away from Calgary to start a circuit of foster homes. No matter how many times he'd lash out, threw tantrums, and got into fights, they'd kept moving him to new, unfamiliar houses. His last move had been 3 years prior, when his last foster dad, Clive Andrews, had picked him up from the adoption center. They'd been on the road for 7 hours before reaching a small bungalow in Ormond. It'd be the longest time they'd spend together. Clive was too busy trading checks from family services for drinks at the bar. Ormond was a small, stale place, a remote town of 6,000 inhabitants where gray winters drag on for most of the year. Frank did everything he could to get into another adoptive family, but he changed his mind when he caught the attention of Julie, a beautiful girl who was convinced that she deserved better than a life in Ormond, and Frank, as an outsider, was her ticket out. Frank attended the parties she threw, where everyone was younger than him and easily impressed, which he liked. He met the impulsive Joey, who liked to show off, and the shy, naive Susie, who was Julie's best friend. They would hang out at an abandoned lodge up Mount Ormand. Their time together was the perfect break from the boring conformity of their small, insignificant everyday lives. Frank saw it as an opportunity to shape their lack of experience into something powerful. He lined up nights of debauchery and rampage, testing their limits. Bullying, vandalism, and theft were essentially their weekend plans. It came to a point where they would do anything he asked. Nothing was off limits when they put their masks on. One evening, Frank dared Joey to vandalize the store that had recently fired him. They snuck inside easily enough, as the building was supposed to be empty after closing hours. But a cleaner, who was still there, grabbed Julie as soon as she came near. Hearing her stifled cries, a dark impulse took over Frank. He rushed to her aid, knife in hand, and without hesitation, planted the blade in the cleaner's back. As the group stared at Frank in shock, he ordered them to finish the job. Joey clenched his jaw, grabbed the knife, and stabbed the bleeding man in the ribs. Susie didn't want to do it. Frank shouted at her. They had to finish what they'd started. Julie closed her eyes and slid the knife into the man's chest. She handed the wet blade to Susie. They were all in this together now. Susie stared at Julie in disbelief as Frank grabbed her trembling hands and inserted the knife deep into the man's throat. Frank told them to move fast. They mopped the blood off the floor, stashed the body in the trunk of Joey's car, and drove up Mount Ormond. All four were digging in the muddy snow to dispose of the body when Frank spotted something moving through the woods. He grabbed his knife and broke from the group to check it out. The fog thickened around Frank, becoming so dense that he could no longer see ahead. He retraced his steps and stumbled onto an ominous trail. He followed the eerie path, as if called by the darkness. Julie, Susie, and Joey finished digging, but Frank was nowhere to be seen. Julie spotted his muddy footsteps in the snow, and the three of them followed the trail, which took them deeper into the woods. When Julie, Susie, and Joey did not return home that night, their parents thought they'd run away with Frank. Each family came up with a different theory. The mood in the town changed, however, when a body was found by the abandoned lodge up Mount Ormond. Ormond was once a small, remote ski town with idyllic slopes, but its resort turned obsolete when Deluxe Ski Village was built on Mount Richards less than 2 hours away. Mount Richards offered fresh slopes with luxurious stores and hotels which crushed Mount Ormond's isolated, decrepit facilities. The fate of the mountain worsened when a mining project took interest in the coal present at its summit. The mountaintop was lined by explosives to extract coal seams from under it. The project caused a public outrage and was stopped midway. Mount Ormond is now a soulful, deforested graveyard where gangs and teenagers go looking for trouble. Some people say that the mountain hides darkness, a bottomless hole from where no one can return. Thank you all for listening. If you wish to keep up with all upcoming lore, then feel free to hit that subscribe button for future videos to come. Compared to previous chapters, which one is your favorite? Comment down below and I'll see you all next time. And as always, good game.